Welcome to another episode of Productive Disruption. I'm your host, Molly McGowan Gorsuch, and I'm the Director of Client Engagement at Rhodes Branding. Today's guest is Dr. Dan Domenech. Dan is in his 14th year as the Executive Director of the American Association of School Administrators, which is the School Superintendents Association. Dan spent 27 of his 36 years in public education as a superintendent. He also served on the U.S. Department of Education's National Assessment Governing Board, the Advisory Board for the Department of Defense Schools, the Board of Directors for the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, the Education Policy Institute, and several other national and international education organizations. Dan, thank you so much for being here with me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So diving right on in, I know your time is very valuable, so let me start with our first question. For the last couple of years, we've seen the educator exodus at various levels of the K-12 field, and bus driver and teacher shortages really monopolized the headlines for a while. But as the leader of the School Superintendents Association, you've been vocal about the trend that's sweeping through district offices nationwide. From your bird's eye view at that national level, what have you been seeing?
Well, I would say that the past 2.5 years now, almost 3 years since COVID began, that the period of time has probably been one of the worst for public education. And I've been in this business actually for 54 years already. I've never seen anything like it. And I think it's important to put it into context. First of all, the shortage of teachers, which is one of the major problems that we're facing today, didn't start with COVID. We were having a teacher shortage even before COVID. But since COVID, what has happened, and this is, I think, not only in education, because we see staff shortages all over the place in just about every industry, but in education, it's affecting it significantly because so many people rely on public education. You know, for the reality is that, yes, the primary purpose of our schools is to provide our children with an education. But let's not neglect the fact that it's also very important for working parents. It's childcare, basically, for many of our working parents. So when COVID began, teachers and educators were heroes because they were taking these kids and they were everything they could to secure their safety. And, even online, as we went online, the effort was being made to provide an education. And educators were heroes, along with emergency responders and healthcare workers. Well, that changed. It changed very rapidly. And it changed because of the issues. And the primary issues, first, it was whether the kids were in school in person or not. And it was a 50-50 proposition. The parents that were working parents wanted their kids to be in school. The parents that didn't have to go to work were concerned about the safety of their children in school and getting COVID. Then we went to masks, the wearing or not wearing of masks. And then we went to the vaccines, the getting vaccinated or not getting vaccinated. And then, as if all of that wasn't enough, we got into the culture wars and the political wars, the cultural race theory, and all of these, the banning of books and all these things that are happening now. So as if the job wasn't tough enough, the additional pressure brought about by all of these factors created an exodus on the part of teachers, on the part of principals, and absolutely on the part of superintendents. I have not seen the number of superintendents leaving their job that I have seen within the last couple of years. It has been significant. In some states, it's been as high as 40-50%. Nationally, it's hard to get your hands on it because nobody collects that information. We try to, but it's spotty. But I can tell you that the reaction, and when you talk to the people that do superintendent searches, is that they've never been busier right now. So all of these factors, and add to it, particularly in terms of superintendents, the abuse that they were subject to, the threats that they were subject to, and not just personally, because I was a superintendent for 27 years. I know what it feels like to be threatened and to be abused by the public. That comes with the job. But not to have my family threatened and abused, not to have my children in attending my schools to be threatened and bullied and abused. And those factors together really created an exodus of leadership in terms of superintendents and principals that we're going to have to deal with. It's a significant factor, and it's going to be a long-term factor.
You know, you referenced your 27 years. And so before you were at AASA, you were a superintendent and in multiple states and in multiple districts. So you've been in that hot seat, like you said, and you've gone through that transitional period a few times. So in your experience, what are the impacts on a school system, its staff, its students, its families, when the leadership is in flux?
Well, you know, in the superintendency, interestingly enough, turnover rate has always been high. Not as high as we've seen it in these couple of years, but it's always been high. The average stay of a superintendent in an urban district is a little over 3 years. It's higher for suburban and rural districts. It's actually about 6 years, but there is a definite turnover in leadership. And one of the things that the research has pointed out, and I point out frequently, is that turnover is not healthy for school systems because school systems require continuity of leadership. And when that is lacking, when it's a revolving door, as it tends to be in urban school systems, it's a problem because it's very difficult to get things accomplished when you're changing leaders that quickly. So the turnover in superintendency has always been a factor. And the research will show you, if you look at our high-performing school systems around the country, what you will see are school systems where the superintendency has been there. The tenure of the superintendent is way beyond 3 years, even 6 years, almost approaching 10 years. On the other hand, when you look at school systems where the superintendency is a revolving door, there's a change in leadership like every year or 2 years, you're looking at a system that's in trouble. So the high-performing systems have continuity of leadership. Low-performing systems do not. So if you apply that to what's happening today, the concern is, and we're already beginning to see it, we're seeing that a lot of districts where the superintendents were, and by the way, a lot of superintendents were fired by the school boards when the superintendent was not aligned with what the school board wanted. For example, we had the situation this past year in Oregon, where the governor of Oregon, through executive order, required that all students be masked. Well, 6 superintendents in Oregon were fired by their boards where the board did not want their children to be masked, even though it was an executive order of the governor. So those districts got rid of 6 superintendents, in many cases experienced leaders, and replaced them with new leaders. And what we're seeing now is that in a lot of the cases where these actions were taken, and the superintendent was let go for political reasons, that the individual that was brought on board has now been let go as well. Because at a time when leadership is so critical, when the situation is so difficult to manage, to bring people on board that are not ready for the job is a problem.
Absolutely. So taking it to a positive perspective, because we can find the positive in everything, hopefully.
There is a silver lining.
There is a silver lining. We like to think that there's this transition in leadership can create opportunity, right?
Yes.
So for new leaders to get schools and broader communities involved, I was really interested in this example of Superintendent Arnetta Wright of Cincinnati Public Schools. She just spent this entire summer engaging in a 100-day plan where she's basically designing an opportunity to hear from the community that she's going to be serving, to map out the superintendent transition that she's going through, and then inform a strategic planning process, which I thought was awesome. So during this difficult and unique time in K-12, what are some of these opportunities, these silver linings that you would recommend incoming superintendents take advantage of?
Well, Exactly because of that. About a year and a half ago, I put together a commission of superintendents and CEOs from the private sector and CEOs from non-for-profits and foundations. And I challenged them to put together a report that would, as you just said, take advantage of the opportunity that COVID has created to, in essence, redesign and reinvent education. By the way, even though I'm very much pro public education and a supporter of public education and have been in it for years, I recognize, as many of us do, that it has to change, and it has not. It has not kept up with the times. So this is an excellent opportunity to reinvent education, to not to go back to the way it was before the pandemic, but to move forward and to make it what it should be and what it should have been all along. So we have a project that we call Learning 2025 that we already have over 120 school districts involved in exactly doing that, redesigning the school systems to do the kinds of things that the superintendent you just mentioned is doing in her district. And that is to provide a system of education that focuses on the needs of the child, that focuses on so many of the rules and regulations that prevent districts from doing what they need to do, that in essence, the pandemic has shown can be done away with. For example, the school calendar, and I'm going to pick on some issues because everybody's familiar with them. The school calendar. Well, the school calendar was shot to pieces by the pandemic, right? Yet we still insist that school starts somewhere around the end of August or September and it goes through June and we give 2 months off to the kids. We can't afford to do that anymore. If we're talking about learning recovery, that all of that time that children have lost because they weren't in school, we have to change the calendar. We have to think about year-round schooling because that makes more sense. We talk about another thing, seat time requirements in high school. Right? In order to get credit for a course, you have to be in the classroom, in person, in your seat, no matter how well you do on the test, in order to get credit for the test. Well, what did the pandemic show you? There were a couple of years there where the kids weren't in school. They were learning at home. So that's another area that the technology allows children to learn anywhere, anytime. Not to say that in-person learning isn't the best thing. It absolutely is. But if we talk about getting back the loss of learning that has taken place, it requires additional time. And here is where the technology comes into place because students can learn from home when they're on vacation, on weekends, definitely over the summer months. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting to watch that there are districts now that have canceled. New York City is the most recent example. New York City is not going to have snow days anymore. When it snows, instead of saying it's a day off from school, no, it's a day of virtual learning. And many districts are doing that. So there are so many opportunities right now to reinvent education, to make it more child-centered. The equity factor, which has been such a major problem in terms of the achievement gap. And by the way, the most recent NAEP scores show that achievement gap has increased even further between the haves and the have-nots. These are the things that we have an opportunity to address and fix and take advantage of the changes that the pandemic has brought about.
And you mentioned using some of the innovations that the pandemic taught us about, but I think also you're speaking a bit to really listening to your constituents, listening to your teachers and your educators and the people was talking about the superintendent in Cincinnati, going ahead and actually listening to those people that they're serving. It's like, how can we change for the better our own community and our own community schools?
And to the point of what she's doing, what's great about that is that it can't be alone. Another issue that we have to deal with is that we can't shut the doors to the school and create a wall and say, okay, the kids are in here, they're ours now, everybody stay away. Can't do that. The doors have to be open. The walls have to be torn down. Parents have to be engaged in the process. The community has to be engaged in the process. It has to be a total community involvement, parent involvement process. So to put the hands up and say, well, the kids are ours now, leave us alone, we're the experts, that's not going to work, and that has to change as well.
Absolutely. And you said about walls coming down. You also have a new, well, it's not new anymore, it's about almost a year old, is the Live Well, Lead Well campaign. At the end of last year, in response to the pressures that superintendents were facing, I know AASA launched that campaign, and that's aimed at providing self-care, mental health, and wellness support for superintendents. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that, those resources, and the impact you're seeing from that?
Absolutely. We began to hear early on from our superintendents the pressure that they were under, the impact the stress that it was having on them personally. And they asked us for help. And what we did is that we put together this program. It's called Live Well, Lead Well. In essence, you can't be a good leader, okay, if you're not taking care of yourself. It's the airplane model. The first thing they tell you is if the oxygen mask drops down, put it on yourself first before you put it on your children or anybody else. You have to take care of yourself in order to be a good leader, to be a good teacher, to be a good principal. So we've had that campaign going ever since. It's been very well received. A lot of the superintendents are taking part in the campaign. And it goes through the simple facts of breathing exercises, that help you relax, the kinds of things you can do when you're feeling stressed out to help you calm down. And then other factors in terms of your nutrition, in terms of making sure you're getting your sleep and making sure that you're drinking the amount of water that you ought to be drinking. All of these things that are necessary for individuals to maintain their health and to maintain the mental attitude that is necessary for them to be good leaders. And I'm happy to say that we've been doing that with our superintendents, but now a lot of our superintendents are doing that with their administrative staff and their teaching staff as well. So the mental health aspects that the pandemic has highlighted for us are critical to make sure that we can focus and do what we need to do well because we're taking care of ourselves first.
Absolutely. And actually, I tuned into one of the resources on the Live Well, Lead Well site. I found some really good podcasts on there that I'm going to be subscribing to now. So not just superintendents can benefit from that. So thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yes.
So what is one word of advice or consideration that you would give to a superintendent that's contemplating leaving their profession right now?
Well, what I do, and there are quite a few, I've had these discussions very often with the superintendent, is that if you need to do that, if the stress is such that you're having a hard time dealing with it, then take some time off. Don't leave the profession, but take some time off, do something else, and then come back. And we're seeing that happen already. The superintendents that have left, they left for a year, they were gone for maybe 2 years, and now they're looking to come back into the profession. So again, with the Live Well, Lead Well, you're not going to be a good superintendent if you're so stressed out that you hate the job. That's not what you want. So if you need to take the time off, take the time off. And then when you're ready, come back. So I'm happy to say that, yes, I've seen a lot of superintendents leave, but now I'm seeing a lot of them calling me and saying, okay, Dan, I'm ready to come back. Can you lead me to a job or a referral for a job? So yes, take the time off if that's where you need to go.
That's awesome. And I'm sure that'll show some interesting data points too when they've re-entered back into some systems. Same question. What would you give a word of advice or consideration to a new superintendent who's entering the scene, and maybe not one of those who have gone and come back, but like a brand new superintendent?
Well, brand new. And, our aspiring superintendent program is busting in terms of enrollment. And so we're training a lot of these new leaders that are going into the job. And so what we're doing is providing them with the resources and the support that they're going to need. When you're going into a job like that and it's your first time and it's a difficult time to be doing the job, don't be afraid to say you need help and you need resources in order to do the job. So that's the first thing we tell them. When you go on the job, we're here for you. We're here to support you. So we provide them with mentors. We provide them with tutors. We provide them with all kinds of support so that they can do the job when they can ask questions. And we bring them together, by the way. And that's a very important concept that superintendents could love to be able to come together because there's only one superintendent per community. There's nobody there that they can talk to. So there are superintendents in other communities, and when they come together, they feel free to be able to talk about what concerns them, to talk about or ask questions that they don't have the answers to. So we've created basically the kind of community among superintendents that allows them to communicate with each other, as well as getting the kind of support that they need to be able to succeed at the job.
So if superintendents wanted to get in on that, how would they go about doing that, other than becoming a member of AASA?
Well, you don't have to be a member. Excuse me. As I said, a lot of these individuals are not superintendents yet. So they're not necessarily our members. So we provide these programs for them. All they have to do is come to our website, aasa.org, and see all of the programs that we have. We have programs for women in leadership. We have programs for minorities in leadership. We have programs for anybody and everybody that is interested in aspiring for the job. And by the way, we've created a pipeline now, which goes all the way to the classroom level. So we work jointly with the principal organizations to offer aspiring principal programs. So teachers go into aspiring principals programs, principals go into our aspiring programs to become superintendent. So we've created a nice pipeline into the superintendents to allow anyone, including a teacher who feels that they're ready to move on to the principalship. And then, of course, the majority of superintendents, probably over 90% of superintendents, were principals before they became superintendents. So we have that pipeline and we have that training.
That's awesome. I know a lot of districts are focusing on the pipeline, especially from the classroom to the teachers, but to see that expand and go on to the superintendency is really unique, and probably have a lot of really strong mentors in that cohort as well.
Exactly. And by the way, we use our most successful leaders, superintendents, as our mentors in the programs. And people who are aspiring for the job love the fact that here's a superintendent that they've read about in the papers all the time, a major national leader, and they can be their mentor to help them through the difficult times of, first getting the job, and then after they have the job as well.
So we end our podcast every time with the same question. If you could wave a magic wand, what is one thing you would fix in education?
Well, right now, my biggest concern is that public education is under attack. We read all of the surveys, that show that teachers don't want their kids to be teachers, that the public in general attitude towards education has dropped significantly. I think it's important. Public education is the foundation of our democracy. 90% of the children in this country attend our public schools. We cannot do without it, but we can't do it well without the support of our parents, without the support of the community, without the support of our public officials. So if I could wave a magic wand, I would like to get a return to that support for public education, recognizing how important public education is to our democracy, to our country, and providing the necessary resources and changes that will make it the outstanding system that we all want it to be.
Very well said. Thank you. And thank you so much for your time today. If our audience members want to connect with you, where can they find you?
They can find me certainly my email is ddomenech, D-O-M-E-N-E-C-H @aasa.org.
Perfect. And I know you also have a blog on AASA as well, and we can link that in our show notes.
And our website, aasa.org, has a lot of the information that I just talked about.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's been a blast talking to you.
Thank you for inviting me, Molly. Great.